still in touch with him. And they're referring people to Dr. Moore. Right? Without further ado, I welcome my dear comrade, as he refers to, Dr. T. Owens Moore. I can find his books is over here.
Sante Sana for that beautiful introduction. However, before I do speak, though, I need to have permission from an elder in the audience. Thank you for that permission. Always have to honor the ancestors before we do speak, before we do come before a crowd. We always have to honor those who come before us, and for me, I'm thankful for those that have been setting the trail for me. You invited me back, and I appreciate that. Evidently, I've done the right thing. To give you what you need. As a family, you have those people that, they eat too much, don't invite them back. They talk too much, so don't invite them back. So evidently, I've done what you asked me to do. I have tried to tell Dr. Orisade Awodola that, maybe we can do this online. Maybe we can do this remote. I said, we are. I said, okay. But she had a magic hat, pulled out a ticket. You're coming here. Magic hat. We got a hotel room. So she's a magician. I don't know how it happens. But how do you also have conferences when you have it in here and remote? How many people can do that? And you know why it can be done? Because we're doing it at Evergreen State College. I cannot continue on without talking about Dr. Maxine Mims. Would not be here. This would not be here without her, correct? That's right. Dr. Joy Hardiman. We are in our venue because of them.
That's right.
So we call them living legends. Our ancestors have spoken to them, they're speaking to us, and we're now speaking to one another. So in that context, you say this is on a hilltop. So whatever you want to MC, just sprinkle some water on some seeds, boom, you got an MC. You got Marsha Taylor on you. You get MCs right here, just off the cuff, and just roll and just go. So you're a product of this environment. The people who have created this just oasis for learning, you don't have this everywhere. I have up there, my first slide is up there, because this is really the Pigment Power Hour. I'm supposed to be telling you that.
All right.
So I went to Howard University, and Howard University's newspaper is the Hilltop. So here we are on the Hilltop.
Yes, I share.
We have some beautiful experiences in our environment that we sometimes don't pay attention to. Why? Because we don't talk about our stuff. So coming to the Pacific Northwest, I wouldn't say it's a challenge, but I'm coming back to family. Because I come back to family all the time. I appreciate the direct flights from Atlanta to Seattle, so it works. But I always think of Bill Withers as an ancestor when I come here.
Oh.
No sunshine when she's
Let's go.
I know.
Let's go.
So I say that jokingly because I love you. But you all have no sunshine out here. And sunshine is important for that pigment power.
Oh.
That's why we're here for the Pigment Power Hour to chat about that. So when we speak about ancestors, I can, on my maternal side of the family, can remember seeing my great-grandmother and great-grandfather, which means they were around. I saw my grandmother and my grandfather. On my paternal side, I only saw my grandmother.
Okay.
Didn't see my grandfather, didn't see my great-great. A lot of that has happened though because of the colonizer. Not for us not being able to keep the track record, know who our people are. It's a challenge. But the ancestors are what are guiding us. Just this week, I was interviewed on Riot TV. Riot started TV by a brother named Kalanji. I was interviewed on Monday. During the same week, he interviewed the daughter of Patrice Lumumba.
Oh.
If you know who Patrice Lumumba is. Leader there in the Congo. The same in the aura of those people that I respect. And here their seeds are now still out there doing their job.
Amen.
To be here today in the midst of scholars that I like to talk about in class, Dr. James Myers, without your work, you wouldn't have a foundation to talk about how we had an Afrocentric model of African psychology. You created a base foundation for us. And as Dr. Awodola said, as a woman in the group, in the crowd, you stood tall. Amidst that masculine energy, presenting a knowledge base for us to understand. So I appreciate your work. Evergreen I brought him to Morehouse College when I was at Morehouse College working. Had him speak for the students. I'd known him for years. So the work, what you heard him talk about, you should see the books. You read the literature, the books, you just can't read one page. You try to read another page, but then you're back to that first page. I mean, it's just so deep. So his work has been a foundation for me. We then have had an opportunity to work together. So we wrote a book called Why Darkness Matters, The Power of Melanin in the Brain. So, along with Brother Bynum, we have Ann Brown, a sister who wrote an article, and also we have an ancestor, Richard King.
Yes.
Still guiding us in the present here, but Richard King is now in the ancestral realm. So we're not doing addition, we'll be honoring him. Dr. Awodola, you mentioned WA.11. He's also in the ancestral realm. Dr. Francis Wells again in the ancestral realm. Speaking names, because guess what? Some people don't even know the names of the people who fought for us. The people who have put their lives on the line, showing us what we need to do to live in a righteous manner. So when we say the Pigment Power Hour, we're dealing with us.
All right.
So, next slide, please. Just to start off, menticide. Bobby Wright, from Chicago, black psychologist, died too young also. May his soul rest in peace. He talked about what menticide is. It's the deliberate and systematic destruction of a group's mind with the ultimate objective being the extirpation of that group. That means you get rid of you. Like you don't exist. So we had Sister Mindy talk about this urban renewal. Get rid of it. We need to know some black communities exist. Perhaps you've seen the stories of black communities underwater. In Georgia, there's a place called Lake Lanier. Used to be a black enterprise, black people. White people flooded that out. Still got the graves underneath the water. Where the white people go over into their little boats on the weekends and hang out. Black community under the water. South Carolina, another one. Lake, not on my mind right now, but in South Carolina, right by Columbia, Lexington area. The same thing happened there. New York, it's multiple places where we had the space and the places, and white folks flooded it out.
Come on.
So when we then don't recognize us, sometimes it's been deliberate for us not to know who we are. So that's menticide. You heard of suicide, you heard of homicide, fratricide. Well, menticide is something we want to talk about. But at in the IAC conference, we're going to talk about what we want to talk about. That magician has put this together, put the scholars together for you to have a certain level of knowledge, for you to take it home and take it to your community. Next slide, please. I'm getting straight to solutions. I don't need 2 slides. I might be finishing.
Go ahead.
Solutions. Rather than wait to the end. Solutions. Number 1, decode words. You already said something earlier about, what was the term you said, Marsha, about?
Recycle.
No, you said something about not the word ancestral worship, but something you said that dark.
Dark, yes, versus light.
How they say something about dark being bad, dark being ugly. No, dark is beautiful. So that's why I wrote Pigment Power, to tell you that you have some power within your blackness. It's beautiful. So decode words. It's your ancestral worship. It's not worship, it's honoring your ancestors. So they throw on you like you worshiping the past. Now you honoring the past. So, yes, we may have that Malcolm X on our shirt. Martin on our shirt, that Harriet Tubman on our shirt. Speaking of Harriet, I came back to Seattle, Tacoma area, got Harriet Walden. Without Harriet Walden. say what I gotta say. Someone who's in the community doing the work.
That's
I
right.
appreciate her interviewing me a few years ago on the radio and exposing the Seattle, Tacoma area to some of the work. But decoding words, we have to be in the position to say what we want to say, not someone else dictating and telling us that. Two, sorry about it, but you gotta pick up the gun.
Oh.
You gotta protect yourself. You can build it out if you want. If someone's knocking down your house, knocking down your door, you throwing a toothpick at them, you in trouble. And we laugh because we see what happened there in Africa, throwing spears at people with these Gatling guns. Guns that just got bullets running, and you throwing a spear. It's because you're not prepared. So in reality, you must understand that the people who are trying to take what you have don't care. And so if you can't protect yourself, that's the bottom line. Deacons for Defense, perhaps you heard.
Yes.
Brother named Akindele Emoji with a book called We Will Shoot Back. Perhaps you heard of Brother Robert Williams out of Monroe, North Carolina. Negroes with guns. The history is there about us protecting ourselves. So you have to pay attention to when they tell you, oh, get rid of yours. Don't fall for that trap. Control information. You must dictate and be able to control what you want to put out for the environment. That's why, again, every state college, Evergreen
Yes.
state college. You're doing what you want to do. And so we're talking about getting more students in. Guess what? If you start putting out a message about what they need to do to have solutions. We deal with solutions here. So in that context, start creating programs that want to, outside of the general classroom setting that's in the major universities. Now you're giving an alternative, and the alternatives you're giving here may be dealing with economics, real estate, what you need to do to not just pick up the gun, but use a gun. Not just have a gun, but why you have a gun. The Constitution is your right to have a gun. All I'm saying is that when you start to learn what the system's about, you break the system down. Oh, now you understand it better. So you're going to have to be able to control information. The whole issue of this critical race theory and why they're concerned about that is because they're sharing information that, well, they're scared for the truth, but scared for it being shared. Why is that? Because that's an issue of self-esteem. That's why it can't be white supremacy. It's got to be white fragility. If you were so supremely powerful, you shouldn't worry about what other people are saying. So we got to decode the words, we got to control information. 4, support an African worldview. It's really that simple. I mean, Malcolm X talked about it. You put some kittens in an oven. You take them out, they come out biscuits.
No.
Still kittens. You're still Africans. The African Lodge started off with Prince Hall. He taught himself Africans. The first African Methodist Episcopal Church. Bishop Owens and all those folks. So we knew we were African then, but we've been kind of taken away from our heritage. So we don't call yourself African, fine, but still support some African interests. So that's why we're here doing that. 5, question integration techniques. People it's not like that. It's us assimilating. If it was integration, they'd be coming to your communities and we mixing and mingling. It doesn't happen like that. So the dichotomy Dr. Myers talked about with the Europeans' mindset of splitting up and either this or that, the question should not be integration versus segregation. The question should be liberation versus control. So in that context, integration not even a story to talk about. It's about protecting you, having your community develop and grow, and not having others worried about it where you have a Black Wall Street happening.
That's right.
Tulsa, Oklahoma happening.
Yes.
So when you have and start to build and create, there's some people that start to feel fearful about that. That's a problem. Lastly, energize and nourish your consciousness. I believe that's why we're here this weekend. I thought we could have done a remote. Can't remotely energize your consciousness representing the bishop. So we have to do it here.
All right.
So here we are energizing with what? Healthy food. You know what I mean? Healthy food, nourishment. All we're doing right here is what? Building something to what leads to creating what we want the world to be. As you said about the bottom, consciousness. If the consciousness doesn't change, we're not going to change. That's a difficult change it the way we want to. So I couldn't just drop the mic right now and just say I'm done. But I was told to say a little bit more. Next slide, please. So in the context of information, but Trey, could you push the slide, please? Next slide. Yes, that's good. So this is a 30-year-old article. And the article's talking about information was done 20 years before that.
Yeah.
That means 50 years ago. Misleading information can turn a lie into memory's truth.
Come on.
It can cause people to believe that they saw things differently from the way things actually were. It can make people confident about false memories and also apparently impair earlier recollections. Once adopted, the newly created memories can be believed as strongly as genuine memories. So we know our minds were manipulated in school.
Yes.
You know, we have been told about ourselves. People still worrying about saying that Christopher Columbus discovered something. Some people still pushing that. You know, the stories we've been told in school aren't about us and our experiences. Therefore, we can be told a whole bunch of lies. And if we're being told that lies, the colonizers told the lies. Who's got it worse, us or them? Because they're now thinking that they really are that great when they really ain't nothing. You told you ain't nothing, but in reality, man, you really are great. So the script's been flipped. So the issue of lies and this whole Trump era that we had, and the whole issue of so-called fake media, fake news, and fake.
Yeah.
Keep telling a lie long enough, it's bound to become. That's a problem. Next slide. So the power of propaganda. National Geographic had an issue on black pharaohs. Black pharaohs. Conquerors of ancient Egypt. What is that? Got a brother on the front. And if you've ever driven or been to Southern Africa, going to Nubia, those pyramids look like the pyramids that are going down to Sudan. That sounds like we weren't even there before. Conquerors, that's a picture of Taharka, like Shabaka, like during the 25th dynasty. So the article's talking about the 25th dynasty, which means it's getting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, up to 25. So in your mind, you're thinking that, oh, that's the first time we were there in Africa, the 25th dynasty. But you know, the 1st to the 6th, 12th, 18th, 25th, we're going to question the black. The other ones, yeah, you got infiltrators. That happens, right? People coming on in. You can just look at today. If Michael Jackson or some Martians came down and saw Michael Jackson and said, oh, that's a white man. They might really think that. So you don't know what you're looking at when you look at images. But the reality is, that makes it look like, oh, we weren't really there in Africa. Black pharaohs and the conquerors of ancient Egypt. So we're really talking about the Nubians. I think we talked about that earlier about the Nubians coming down. But look at this other one. That's like 2008, I think. This is Queens of Egypt. Came about 12 years later. Picture clear. Nefertiti on the front. That's a white one. Now that's from I read from Egypt Revisited by Ivan Van Sertima, talking about Asa Hilliard's also talking about this. This is a bust found in a sculptor's workroom in Germany. But if you go to Europe, they have this image there, the bust, like behind glass, like that's Nefertiti. So that it doesn't make sense. So then, if you, that's Queens of Egypt, and when women ruled the world, and there's no real images of black people within the National Geographic magazine, you can pick up on your own. It does talk about Hatshepsut, because she was so to be some leader or woman leader that wore a beard. She was some transvestite and talking some crazy stuff. That's how they think. No, she was just a woman representing and being in that issue of being a pharaoh. She had to wear how pharaohs look, but she was just a strong black woman. We got a lot of them in our family. Next slide. So, Queens of Egypt, that's what's on the magazine, but as I walk through the Cairo Museum, and here's the museum, could be right here. In the back room is that.
All right, in the back room.
Not in display when you come into the museum. In the back room, there's stuff that they're kind of like, we'll put this to the side.
Uh-huh.
It's a stela of what Nefertiti really looks like. You know black women got beautiful dimples. I don't know what that is. But that's what we're being told with Nefertiti. That's the power of propaganda. So people will start looking at that and saying, well, Egyptians were white.
Yeah.
And so, okay, fine. Because after finally we're dark-skinned white people, though. See, still manipulating the words, manipulating the ways you really express it. So, that's problematic. Now, if you look at their skin, white, now in Africa, hot, dark, not like Seattle, Tacoma, or something. But, next slide, please. Next slide. That's Queen Hatshepsut's temple, carved out of a rock in the mountain. It's hot. You can't be unpigmented, melanin recessive, working in that kind of environment, doing that work. They were unquestionably black, pigmented to do that kind of work. Now, I'm not sweating right there, but I was at the Valley of the Kings. It was 103 degrees when we went. You can't be ivory colored like that Nefertiti working in that environment. So you know that's propaganda. So Africa is hot. So out of the stone, again, if you didn't go into the temple, you see more stuff inside the temple. Who does that? No, how do you do that? Next slide, please. That's going up the pyramid, the Great Pyramid. That's now inside the pyramid. Sweat.
Oh my goodness.
You can't be melanin recessive hanging in that environment. They had to be black people. In the middle of the pyramid, with this technology, took my phone out, put the compass on, directly north, west, south, east, perfect alignment. In the middle of the pyramid, how does that happen? Massive stones. How do you do that? Next slide, please. That's the base of the pyramid. Look at those stone slabs. Look at the gigantic columns. Now I put the word colossal up there. You know what colossal means? Like enormous, like, oh my gosh. So, it's so big you don't even see me in the picture, do you? Not up there. You don't even see me in the picture, it's so big. I'm standing at the bottom of the column. You go there, how did they do this? I mean, you were there the whole trip. How did they do this? That's the power of what you can do. So when you're told you can't do, when you're told something wrong with you, when you're told you're inferior, when you're told over and over and over, you start what? Putting your head down. Like you could never do. So psychologically, that's how they get us. But when you start going and see where you trekked, what you did, and what you built and created, there's no way they can take that away. That's why they don't teach it in the schools. Once they start teaching in the schools, then your whole mindset changes. And guess what? Now you might not be able to control that little black kid without asking questions. Don't ask them questions, just learn the lesson.
Yes.
That's not learning when you push something on somebody. Paul Freire wrote the book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Talking about how you teach oppressed people with the banking concept, just throw it at them. Just this is it. Don't ask any questions. Versus dialogically, with now some interaction. What you're talking about. So basically, well, they don't want to talk about again the issue of why those things were created. Because where you see those columns, and not even just the column, how do you get the big massive block on top of that?
Yeah.
That's right. You'll go there and ask the same questions. How did they do this? So you had people all over the world coming to this area of the world, like Jesus. People all over the world coming to this place, like Socrates, Plato. All over the world coming to learn from the people who did this. And here we now don't even know the names of the people. Your ancestors. Next slide, please. So I wrote Pigment Power, and in the Pigment Power book, I have a chapter talking about astrobiology, but I talk about the book because it's a book. You see a book because I'm showing you. There's the book called Blacks, The Race from Beyond the Stars.
Oh.
It says Greatest conspiracy in history. If man evolved from apes, why can't a human mate with them and produce a half man, half ape? Offspring. Scientists know that evolution is not possible, but to reveal the fact that man arrived on the earth thousands of years ago from space would raise the question, which race colonized the earth first? The knowledge that the black race terraformed Earth and founded the three first great civilizations, Sumer, Egypt, and India, from which all subsequent civilizations were copied, led scientists to devise the greatest cover-up of all time. The history of the black race has been altered. The time has arrived for mental blinders to be thrown off and for blacks to learn their true history. Now, I'm only sharing that because believe it or not believe it. I can read it or not read it. Point it, you can't read it. Why? Because you can't find it.
Oh.
Go ahead, do your little internet search. You can't even find the book. How do you scrub something from the internet? How do you take it away so you can't even find it? That's the main reason why I put it in my book, to talk about the fact that you can't even find the book. Someone must have thought it was that important to what? Push to the side. Isn't the internet free? Isn't all information free? Well, how could something just be taken away from you having access to it? So you say it's a book, because I got the book. But I'm just throwing it out like that to you about how information can be controlled.
Yes.
Next slide. So, on the topic of melanin, I think that's what we're going to talk about, pigment power hour. So, these are molecules. As those molecules are being kind of created and transformed, those are the molecules that are in your body. So that bottom one there is the molecule that we're calling the melanin in our skin, your melanin. So there's also something called pheomelanin, people who are like raised freckles and a little lighter. That's on the right side there, pheomelanin. Point is that all those little like blocks or those little circles are the chemical compounds that make that particular molecule. Melanin is a carbon-based molecule, black. So those circles that you may see, benzene rings, are circular and they are kind of collectively together. Those benzene rings are important to what? Make the structure of the molecule. It's almost like indestructible. It's almost like an organizing molecule that creates and develops and builds. And so without it, you don't have life. This melanin is just like the chlorophyll in the plants. The green, chlorophyll. Without the green, there is no plant because there's no chlorophyll, there's no life. It's the same thing in your body. So it certainly needs water and nourishment and no sunshine, but it needs it. So that green, that chlorophyll is like the melanin in our bodies. Without the nourishment, it's not going to take care of properly. So from the very beginning up there, tyrosine. Won't go too make it too complex for you. I'm just showing you that visually, the names relate to molecules. The molecules are what are in your body to make your body function properly. So tyrosine is an amino acid. You're not getting that in your body, you're not going to make the melanin in. You're also not going to make the neurotransmitters. So that's why your diet becomes critical. So for the vegetarian diet and the nice food we have for this environment, it's nourishing our body the right way.
All right.
Beyond tyrosine, something called tryptophan. It's also an amino acid. Tryptophan makes a chemical called serotonin. Perhaps you heard of that. Serotonin is involved in depression. A lot of people live in this Seattle area, you heard of winter depression or seasonal affective disorder. They result from an imbalance of that pineal gland that's not producing the right levels of serotonin and melatonin, creating an imbalance, causing the person to have those changed moods and feelings. But the chemicals from the beginning, without those chemicals, you don't have what your body needs. Next slide, please. So that melanin molecule is not just here on the outside of our body, it's also inside of our brain. The brain, since I've studied it as a psychologist, is the most elaborately constructed entity in the universe. The brain can make you do whatever you want it to do. You can also think you can't do something there and get it done. So you have the power within your brain to make things happen. So it's really just a piece of fat sitting in your head. I say fat because that's what it's made of. So I'm sorry, I called you a fat head. Don't take it personally. Between those ears, that fat, 2.5 to 3 pounds sitting in their head. So on the left side is like a split of the brain. You have the left side and the right side.
All right.
Left hemisphere, right hemisphere. On the right side there, that's like a cross section of showing you inside what you would see in the brain. When Dr. Bynum talked about the mental nerve tract, Right where that white part is on the bottom going up towards the middle of the brain, that's the brain stem. The brain stem is where we see that mental nerve tract starts off. Then going up further to the brain as it then affects your consciousness. So all that is deep within. The sun's not shining deep in, but that blackness is already there from the beginnings of time. So it's white here because anytime you see white in the brain, it's dealing with tracks and fibers, things that path and go through. You see darkness in the brain, it's talking about cell bodies. So we heard the word cortex mentioned. I believe Dr. Myers talked about the cortex too. It's just a small covering around the outside of your brain. That's the cortex. You see a tree? In a tree, the bark around the tree, that bark is really the cortex. That's not a tree, it's just the bark. So the same thing with the cortex, with those dark cells. So the dark cells are usually things called neurons, and the white stuff is tracks, pathways. But then there's some really dark centers that are in the brain that become critical to our consciousness.
Okay, T.
Before I go there, there's in the middle of the brain, this right here, that's the pineal gland. So it's the only organ that's not bilaterally symmetrical, which means it's just that one sitting there in the middle of the brain in fluid, sitting in fluid. So as the chemicals are circulating, it can receive those chemicals. As it's sitting in fluid and you meditate, it can become erect and move and stimulated. So that pineal gland becomes that seat of consciousness, that seat of the soul, that opportunity to move to a higher state of consciousness. Next slide, please. So for just quick understanding that your lobes of the brain can impact how you're observing and recalling information. Your front part of the head, the frontal lobe, is really for like movements and also intellectual reasoning. So when we start to look at compartmentalizing things, we can say that, but I'll make a comment about this compartmentalization in a second. And the top part of the brain is parietal lobe. So we're talking about sensory experiences. And also there's a gyrus around there. People have talked about that being activated for people who have out-of-body experiences. So those who will be able to kind of see things and be like floating that part of the brain, it kind of makes sense of just dealing with the body, with sensations. And so now you're out of your body. On the back side of the head is the occipital lobe. That's for vision, seeing. It seems kind of odd because your eyeballs are up here. How's it go all the way back here? Now it's being processed. Well, that's how it is, but it does seem weird. But have you ever seen those stars, like you sneeze, like the cartoon stars around your head? Well, not that big kind of stars. You know, the little things that are in your body. That's because your brain got stimulated backwards. You sneeze, but your head went backwards. So then the impulses go the wrong way. So now your eyes are seeing things. So that's how the brain is constructed like that. On the bottom part of the head, here on the side, is the temporal lobe. So hearing and emotions. So these are compartmentalized, but we now know that we can't just say only these areas are only for this. Because we do have plasticity in our brain, but now we're just talking about the issue of consciousness and the way we think about the brain now. All these thoughts that we have aren't maybe originating from one place. They be maybe coming from multiple places. May not just be the brains. Now the brain is now connected to something what? Higher and outside of us. Other planes of existence. We talk about that in science of melanin. You got the physical plane, ethereal plane, astral plane, and the spiritual plane. All those planes are around us. Some people are clairvoyant enough to know that. They can feel that, see that. Some people have no relevance to that. But it's there, it's just a matter of us paying attention to that. Next slide, please. So electricity is the energy to make things happen. If this power went out, cell phones went out, I don't know what y'all be doing. I'm gonna read a book. I'll find some light, I'm gonna read a book. People don't know what to do when there's no electricity.
Use that mic.
Oh, sorry, people don't know what to do when there's no electricity. You had no electricity, it has to scream at you. It has to make you hear what I'm trying to say. So us to be dependent upon this electricity can be problematic.
That's right.
But it's the source of life. The spark inside your body are ions. I-O-N-S. Ions are molecules that charges on them. Without those ions in your system, guess what? You have nothing happening in your life. Sodium, potassium, chloride, calcium. Without them functioning in your body, there is no life. Sodium and potassium, sodium chloride, sodium chloride salt. Because you know when you sweat, you perspire. So those ions, if they start to not work right in your body, start cramping up, huh? Right? So the spark of life are those ions. Next slide, please. So how those ions flow becomes very important. Next slide, please. So in science, there's something called an action potential. The action potential is like the energy that makes the cell fire. Won't get too complex on that, because we're just dealing with ancestral healing here. We're not doing too much science, but when you look at this, when you go from the left to the right, this is happening as it goes down the street. Some changes in the membrane are occurring. So you have some blue, which is your sodium, some light blue, which is like your potassium, and they go in and out of the membranes of the cell. So that's the electricity part that's inside your body that makes your brain work. Without that happening, there's nothing happening. You can shut down those systems and not feel nothing. There's a movie called Serpent and the Rainbow. Serpent and the Rainbow. About Haiti. Haitian medicine. These people were being buried alive in coffins, and they weren't really dead. Y'all saw that?
Yeah.
White boy went down to, they went to him, he worked at Harvard. Go down there and find out what it is so they can come back and make a drug called Zombitol. You know, they always think about drugs. They always think about exploiting the people's land, what they do. So they had this particular powder throw on people. And then they would just seem like they're dead. Fast forward to the end of the movie, it says that in that particular powder was TTX, tetrodotoxin. In the movie, they're saying, oh, we don't really know what it is, but it shuts down your sodium function. So in reality, those people weren't really dead, but their electricity was so low, the stimulation was so low in their bodies that it looked like they weren't really breathing. So there was no activity. So this chemical came from the gills of pufferfish. You know the pufferfish, they say it's toxic. So that concoction was what was used. It wasn't crack, but it did happen on the crack epidemic. In the 1980s when this came out. So it's white powder making people act like zombies. What they put on the screen sometimes would happen in real life.
Yes, that's right.
So when you can manipulate and shut down these things, that's how some anesthetics work. Novocaine, Propofol. Propofol works by working on GABA, like amino acid that slows things down. But these chemicals are created to shut down the system so you're not feeling anything. So I'm just trying to get you to understand the importance of ions. That's how critical they are. They can make you not be aware of what's happening to you. Next slide, please. So essentially, that looks like a cake on the other side there, but that's actually a lipid bilayer. That's the cell membrane that covers your cell. So it looks like there's two layers, because that's why I call it bi. It's a lipid bilayer. That little green thing in there is a channel where chemicals like those ions go in and out. As the chemicals go in and out, guess what? The cell is firing. If that's closed up, no cells, no ions, no flow goes through, therefore nothing's going to happen. So if you look over here, this is a double layered system for rapid fire. Where you find those double layered systems are where you find pigmented cells. That's why the cells fire much faster and quicker where there's pigmented cells. That's called gap junctions. So those gap junctions make things fire quicker and faster. That's why melanated cells trigger quicker energy. So that's the gap junction. I'm just showing you that because, again, as you take this one layer, you stack another one on top of it, we have this, and these little connections here are how fast the impulse can be. And that happens again where there's melanated cells. Next slide, please. So where they have pigmented neurons, we're talking about this, I mentioned nerve tract, where that green is going up towards the brain, where the locus coeruleus is, so the ventral tegmentum, the dorsal raphe nucleus. In those areas are where some of your neurotransmitters are made, like serotonin, like norepinephrine, like dopamine, where they're made and produced deep in the brain. Dark cells. There's no sunshine in there. It's there from the beginning for a reason. So if you now cut the brain, and now you then start looking at those other areas and expose them to a coronal section, that's the bottom one there, where you see the, it says reticular formation, it's related to activation, like being in the awake state. See, it says, you okay if I go over there? You see that?
Come right ahead.
So substantia nigra, this is the dark area. It's white here. I'll show you another slide where this is dark. The red nucleus, considered to be mirror neurons. What are mirror neurons? When you look at something and you see it, like a baby's looking at you and you smile, and the baby smiles. Those are mirror neurons lighting up. If I asked you, can you moonwalk? What's the first thing that comes to your mind? Moonwalk. Michael Jackson, High Waters, right? That's the mirror neurons. He's not even here. This is the first thing that comes to your mind, somebody moonwalk.
Yeah.
So the mirror neurons light up dark or the red, but the pigment, that's the point. Next slide, please. So up top there, you see an absence of the darkness. There's again another coronal section through the brain, midbrain. The bottom there, the neuromelanin, where you see the dark area. Dark, dark, absent, absent. So a healthy brain should have that darkness there. It's a substantia nigra. So you lack the darkness there. You lack the ability to produce the dopamine. Therefore, you'll suffer from a disease called Parkinson's disease.
Oh.
So, shuffling when you walk, rigidity in your movement. If you tell them to do something, can't quite initiate it. So movement's impaired. Usually you hear about the movement problems versus dementia and other issues, but the movement is impaired. And my point about the movement is, you know, someone can be impaired with movement. Imagine if you enhanced it. You do what we do on the basketball court, football field, tennis, anything we do, gymnastics. You heard of Simone Biles? Revolutionized the whole sport, did you? Dominated for not 1, 2, 3 years, almost a decade. Multiple Olympics, world championships. Who does that? So, when we talk about excelling, we can look at taking you away and see what the problems are, but what happens when you excel it? That's the part they don't want to talk about with you. I'm telling you that because that's what we need to study, how you can excel by studying it. Next slide, please. So when we look at the differences, that cell right there, I know Dr. Hardeman's going to talk about Ra selection. But in my book, Dark Matters, Dark Secrets, I have cellular Ka. So Ra is relating to the sun from Kemet. Ka is relating to the two hands that are up in the surrender sign. So the cellular Ka, to me, is how the melanocyte looks in your skin. That's a melanocyte, saying Almighty Sun baby. And sitting in the skin at the top of the arms are where the melanin is. Those little dark black granules are the melanin. They come up to your skin to give you what? Even skin tone. It's not splotches. You got some diseases or some problems like vitiligo or pustulosis or some of those problems that may happen, but other than that, it's just even skin tone. So the darkness that comes up, for African, you can see the pigment. Asian and European, less granules, therefore less pigment, therefore less color. Make sense? Yeah. Next slide, please. So, on the left side there is a brain cell. On the right side there is a melanocyte, the one that makes your melanin. So, we can also talk about the macrocosm and the microcosm. So, what's there on the outside of the body looks like the same thing as the inside of the body. So, the cell in the brain, with your dendrites and your axons, if all that is what receiving and sending, and that responds to electricity, and they can also submit chemicals in your skin, does the same thing. So that baobab tree, look at baobab tree, that cellular Ka, which we just talked about, that cell itself responds to light. As it responds to light, it makes your skin dark. So that's why it's really backwards for kids to say, oh, your mom is or daddy to say, oh, don't go out in the sun, I want you to get black. Isn't that shame? Scared about children getting black. I want you to get dark. When you're dark, it's what's saving your life. Global warming is coming. You're in good shape. Next slide, please. So, do we talk about melanin as a hormone? We say it's pigment. But if it's responding to light and it's being released, So as a woman's giving birth, there's a linea nigra that goes down from her navel to her vaginal area. Why is that darkness even develop? You know? Why does it even develop like that? So it's because you got chemicals being emitted that makes that happen. On the left side there, this was stress hormones. So from the hypothalamus down to the pituitary down to the organs. So anything dealing with endocrinology means you got hormones being released that go from one area to the target organ to another part of the body. So in the hypothalamus, CRH or CRF stands for corticotropic releasing hormone, talks to the pituitary to release ACTH, adrenocorticotropic stimulating hormone, which then talks to your adrenal glands to get cortisol. Stress. Heard of cortisol before. Where's it come from? Adrenal glands, which is stimulated by the brain. Same things happen on the other side with melanin. From the hypothalamus, this large chemical called POMC. Sorry, but it's called pro-opioid melanocortin. Second one is melanocyte stimulating hormone, MSH. Pituitary then talks to the what? Skin to make the skin dark. So we can really look at melanin as a hormone. And so the same thing that's happening externally, there's got to be some things going on internally.
Come on, tell me.
Next slide, please. So internally, the nervous system is developed very early on. Nervous system and the heart. Heart and nervous system. Gut. All that's connected. You know you ever got a gut feeling about something? All that's connected. And so at very early stages, if you do not have the melanin in that nervous system, you're going to have things like spinal bifida, neural tube defects, problems with your development. So melanin becomes key and critical, not just for the outside of your skin, but internally as you are developing. Next slide, please. So this is a cross section of what the so-called top of the beginning of the nervous system would look like. So at the spinal cord, certainly, because you know everything starts out small, spinal cord, but on the top of the spinal cord, you've got these areas called the neural crest. The neural crest are called the cellular groups that go to different parts of the body. It could be the skin, it could be your internal organs. So those neural crest cells travel different places. It says it could be go to your adrenal glands, your autonomic nervous system, your melanocytes. So from the beginning, everything's connected. That's why you feel a certain way when things are happening. You might have a child in another state. You just know something's wrong. Grandma used to talk about that. I don't know, brothers, I don't know if we can feel that, but mothers, y'all have that connection. Something's wrong to your seed. You know? So that issue of the body having some connection from the very beginning stage of development explains why that would be. Next slide, please. So those are the neural crest cells that I have up top that I showed you on the other slide where they were. And so as you see, they can impact your melanocyte there in the middle. They can impact your leukocytes in terms of your immune system. They can affect your sensory system. They go everywhere. So from the very beginning, where the melanated cells are, the neural crest are, the melanated cells are, they go to different parts of the body. And now you see the connections. Next slide, please. So melanin in nature, the actual process of transmitting or channeling energy is based on the electromagnetic nature of the body. So that's why all this 5G technology and all this stuff they talk about the energy, the radio frequency is real. Some people are impacted more than others by its frequency, which means it can create some problems. So we need to be aware of that. Melanin is a natural semiconductor at room temperature. You know what? You know they're using that technology to make trains go faster. Use tools. I mean, use the airplanes. One reason why the airplane's black on the front to absorb the heat. So what? Even for the space shuttles that coming in back to the atmosphere, to make sure that it doesn't blow up. It's absorbing energy. In drill bits, drill bits are dark in color. So what absorb the heat so drill bits don't break. Melanin science is everywhere outside of our body. Melanin permits direct communication with nature. Okay, people may say that's controversial. I talked about that. Both in those material spiritual connection. What does that really mean? Because if you don't know what spirit is, you don't understand it. That's why it goes on to talk about spirit. What is spirit? Something you got to feel, be connected to, and that's something they don't really talk about. When I said earlier that we may have a Michael Max or a Harriet Tubman or a Martin on that shirt, they're not going to have a JFK. They ain't going to have a Truman. They ain't going to have a drummer. They might have trombone. They might do that. But they're not really interested in ancestors like that. They don't keep that spirit alive. It's just the reason why we do that is because of, again, we're connected to a higher phenomenon. So we say nature, look what's going on now. This makes possible the long anticipated design of melanin-based electronics, which can be used for implanted devices due to the pigment's biocompatibility. Is that me saying that? Making that up? Now that's me saying that years ago, and now people are studying this. Next slide, please. Melanin research, electricity. The dark brown pigment is now being applied to conduct electricity. Landmark study, frontiers in chemistry. Italian researchers subtly modified the structure of melanin by heating it in a vacuum. So they've now made a way to make melanin, this is right there, billion times more conductive. So they're using it in science, synthetic and natural melanins. I talked about this in 1995, Science of Melanin, about the research that can be coming on. So maybe at Evergreen State College, so we need to have the people that now put this into the laboratory and study that. I'm just a conduit at this point. I can't go on forever. But the Bond retired, Sister Myers retired, I'm not retired yet. I'm passing on to the next people to take it to the next level. Next slide, please. So as I conclude, ancestral guidance in the 13th. Do you know the day is the 13th?
Yes,
I don't know why I'm back in Washington State. 13 is my lucky number, though.
Yeah.
I wrote a book called Clue Seeker. I journeyed back through time to search for identity. Why did I write that? Because 13 kept popping up in my life like something's going on. Don't know what it is. This is to talk about the butterflies. Look at 313. 3, 1,
What about
3.
the 13th planet?
13th planet?
All of it, all of that.
That's a little bit beyond me right now. But the 13 itself, to me, triggers a whole lot of important things that happen. The last time I was here, we won the city championship in tennis. 2019, this is the last time I was here. We won the men's city championship, seniors. Guess what? The 10th, we won the city championship again. That's 2021. Ancestral guidance. It's like every time Seattle comes on the point of visiting,
You win.
positive things happen. Yeah.
Right.
It's 13. Today is the 13th. My lucky number. Let's just talk about 313, the butterflies. I talked about the butterflies and the what? And Lucy. So I'm just saying that to say there's some power going on in Seattle. It's Tacoma.
Tacoma, that's
The Washington State. Pacific Northwest. I can't get that wrong, man. Next slide, please.
Where were you? I don't see you in that picture. Uh-oh.
That was it. There.
Okay.
So,
All right.
next slide, please. So, we control our destiny. So, you know, not a lot of us play tennis, so we have to go to a long way away, where ain't a lot of us. A lot of melanin recessive folks play a lot of T in tennis, not us. It was a long, all-black superhero team. Came through twice, because of the Pacific Northwest energy. I appreciate you. So, we control our destiny.
I say.
We control how we view the world. That's why I say pigment power. So as I conclude, next slide. Thank you for your attention, and again, for any information about me, you can go ahead and check my email or my website. Thank you very much.